Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today I wanted to start class out by asking you to think about one piece of literature, I use literature a little casually here, piece of literature that you have had a very difficult time reading, and one piece of literature that you've had a very fun, easy time reading. So I'll give you 30 seconds there. One piece that you had a difficult time with, and one piece that you had a very easy time reading. Okay, so what made it so difficult? Two volunteers. What made the difficult piece of writing so difficult? Jessica.
Well, the first book that came to mind was The Sound and the Fury.
Okay.
And it jumps between time periods, back and forth, not time, but past and present, and it never gives you a hint of when it is. So you're just reading along, and all of a sudden it's like 20 years earlier.
Sure, and then there's 4 different narrators.
Exactly, I was going to say, and the narration jump.
Yeah, I remember having a wonderful time with that. One more volunteer for difficult. Alyssa.
The book I chose as the most difficult was The Death of Artemio Cruz, and it kind of went along with Jessica's answer, kind of very similarly, because it goes backwards in time. So it starts out like when he's on his deathbed, and then it goes back to like his middle life, and it was just, and the first one is in like the third person, and then the second person, and then the first person, and so it's really just hard to understand who is talking to you. And
so a lot of different time changing and a lot of different perspectives to look at. So one of the biggest things to understand that when we're reading difficult materials, to actually physically orient yourself to what you're reading. You're not going to know what you're reading until you get into it. And so the first thing is to actually get in there and see what it's like, because if you read Harry Potter and you read the whole book in 2 hours, and then you expect to pick up your philosophy textbook and read it in 2 hours, you're going to have a real sore mind on your hands. So the first thing to do is to actually make a feasible amount. Look at your text and say to yourself, okay, what can I get done? How much time do I have? And what that does, can anybody think about what that does, actually allotting the correct amount of time? What is allotting the correct amount of time for the reading material helping you avoid what?
Fast skimming.
Skimming. Avoid just frustration in general, right? If you allotted 30 minutes to read a chapter and you get through a fifth of it, in 30 minutes you're going to be really frustrated, and it's just going to add to that whole frustration of the difficult material. So you need to make yourself aware of what the material is like and allot yourself a feasible amount of time to read it. The second tip for reading difficult material is scanning. So scanning is a really helpful thing, and scanning is one of those things where you look through your material and some of the stuff's going to jump out at you. Some of it's going to not necessarily jump out at you, it's going to remain on the page, but the stuff that jumps out at you builds that confidence, and it allows you to say, okay, well, I have a starting ground, I'm not completely lost, I know at some point I'm going to get to something I know, and here it is, and I'm ready for it. So scanning is really helpful. And that goes right along the lines of focusing on what you know first, because we all do that, scaffolding. Any type of learning that we do, we focus on the things that we've already learned. And so that's one thing that's really helpful, is to actually look through the difficult material and say, all right, I've got some of this, I have some confidence, I've got a place to start. Does anybody read with a dictionary? Does anybody read with a dictionary?
It depends on what I'm reading, but I have before.
Yeah. So it's difficult, and why? I mean, does anybody have any challenges why they would hesitate to read with a dictionary? Does it go faster when you read with a dictionary? No, a lot slower. You get more meaning out of the book, but it goes a lot slower, and it takes more time to actually read what you want to accomplish. But reading it with a dictionary obviously gives you more meaning in general. So reading with a dictionary and looking up words is extremely helpful. The thing that I wanted to focus on here, though, when we're reading difficult material, especially seeing as my content area is math, and I do assign reading, is to ask yourself, what do you want to get out of the material? What are the key questions? And so a lot of the testing that happens in math is, can you execute this example? Can you solve for X? So what I like to focus on with my students is to say, you know, you're going to read a whole chapter. The chapter's going to start here. It's going to have a long paragraph, a long paragraph, a long paragraph, and then it might have a definition, and and then it might have an example. I don't want my students to harp on this. The introduction is helpful. If they read it, that's great. But this is where they're going to get the grit of the material, is in the actual concept, the definition itself, and the example. So if you know what you're doing, if you know what your teacher wants out of you, if you know what the objectives are for the reading itself, that's going to be really helpful. And I like my students to read definitions, vocabulary, and also examples. This stuff is helpful. It's there for a reason, right? It glues the book together, but this is what we're going to learn. And so if you go into a book knowing your objectives, as opposed to looking at the book and saying, I don't know what I'm supposed to get out of this, I need to read every single piece, that's another thing that's going to help difficult material. Another example would be a history textbook. I know a lot of students, especially myself, I'm a very visual learner, and even if the teacher didn't say it, I would know that visuals are going to help me out a lot. So that would be one thing that I would focus on in a history textbook. If there's a map there, that's going to bring me in. And that's going to help me to actually build my confidence and say, I do know what's going on a little bit here, even though the materials feel very difficult. I can see the map and I can understand it. And then the biggest thing is just to not panic, because I know frustration is a big thing in learning, and I have students that just say, I can't read this book, I'm just going to open it and I'm going to immediately panic. And having activities that you can fall back on when reading doesn't make sense is extremely necessary. So finding any kind of activity that you can say, I'm going to push this aside for 10 minutes and then I'm going to get back to it is extremely critical. Thank you.